The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September 1883, and Olivia Norton watched her mother's face crumble like dried clay as she read the words that would mark their family with shame for years to come. Her fiancé, Charles Whitmore, son of the wealthiest banker in San Francisco, had called off their engagement through a coldly formal wire, citing irreconcilable differences that everyone in their social circle would interpret as Olivia being found wanting in some fundamental way. Her father's mercantile business in Independence, California, had already been struggling, and this public humiliation would be the final nail in the coffin of their respectability. Olivia stood in the parlor of their modest home on the edge of town, her hands trembling as her mother thrust the telegram at her with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Her younger sister Margaret gasped from the doorway, and Olivia could already see the calculations happening behind her eyes, the realization that this scandal would taint her own prospects for a good marriage. Their father would be devastated when he returned from his latest failed attempt to secure credit from the very bank that Charles's family controlled. "How could you?" her mother whispered, her voice breaking. "What did you do to make him withdraw his offer? 3 months before the wedding, Olivia. 3 months. We have already ordered your trousseau, sent the invitations, made all the arrangements. The deposits are non-refundable. We will be ruined, absolutely ruined." "I did nothing wrong, Mother," Olivia said. But even as she spoke the words, she felt the weight of doubt crushing down on her shoulders. Had she been too outspoken during their last visit to San Francisco? Had she smiled too freely at the dinner party where Charles's business associates had told ribald stories? Had she failed some test of propriety that she had not even known she was taking? The days that followed were a special kind of torture. Word spread through Independence like wildfire through dry brush, carried by the knowing looks of shopkeepers and the whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when Olivia entered a room. Her father closeted himself in his study, drinking whiskey and writing increasingly desperate letters to creditors who would no longer extend him the courtesy of a reply. Her mother took to her bed with one of her headaches, leaving Olivia to manage the household and endure the pitying glances of their remaining servants. Margaret stopped speaking to her entirely, communicating only through pointed silences and the occasional martyred sigh. "You have destroyed everything," she finally said one evening, as they sat down to a dinner that neither of them could eat. "Father says we may have to close the store, we may have to leave Independence entirely and go somewhere no one knows us, and all because you could not manage to keep one man interested for the duration of a simple engagement." Olivia felt something crack inside her chest, but she kept her face carefully blank. She had learned in these past weeks that showing emotion only invited more criticism, more analysis of her fundamental inadequacy as a woman and a daughter. So she nodded and excused herself from the table, climbing the stairs to her room where she could finally let the tears come in silent, shaking waves that left her exhausted and hollow. The following Sunday, the family did not attend church. It was an acknowledgement of their fall from grace more profound than any public announcement could have been. Olivia stood at her bedroom window and watched the other families walk past in their Sunday best, their backs straight with righteousness and respectability. She recognized the Hendersons, the Clarks, the Prices, all families that had once welcomed the Nortons into their homes for tea and conversation. Now they walked past without even glancing toward the house, as if the building itself had become invisible, erased from the social landscape of Independence. October arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hints of the winter that would soon descend from the Sierra Nevada mountains. Olivia's father made the announcement at breakfast one morning, his face haggard and his hands shaking slightly as he set down his coffee cup. "I have secured a position in Sacramento," he said, his voice carefully devoid of emotion. "We will be leaving Independence at the end of the month. I have arranged for the sale of the store and this house, though we will take a substantial loss. Your mother and I believe this is for the best. A fresh start, where no one knows about the unfortunate circumstances of this past summer." Olivia felt numb. She knew she should feel grateful that they were not being left entirely destitute, that her father had managed to salvage something from the wreckage of their life here. But all she could think about was how thoroughly she had failed, how completely she had let down everyone who depended on her. She had been raised to believe that a woman's worth was measured by the man she could attract and keep, and she had proven herself worthless by that standard. The preparations for leaving consumed the household. Olivia packed away the trousseau that would never be used, the delicate lace and fine linens that her mother had spent months selecting. She wrapped her few pieces of good jewelry in cloth and placed them in a trunk, wondering if she would ever have occasion to wear them again. Margaret made pointed comments about how much smaller their new house would be, how much less fashionable Sacramento society was compared to what they might have enjoyed if Olivia had only managed to fulfill her duty. It was on a Thursday afternoon 2 weeks before their planned departure that Olivia finally could not bear another moment inside the house. She needed air, space, some relief from the suffocating atmosphere of reproach and disappointment. She told no one where she was going, simply grabbed her shawl and walked out the back door, heading away from town toward the open land that stretched between Independence and the foothills. The sky was the deep, endless blue that only existed in California, and the air smelled of sage and dust and the distant promise of snow. Olivia walked until her feet ached, until the house was lost behind the gentle roll of the land, until she could no longer hear the phantom echoes of her mother's weeping or her sister's accusations. She found herself near a creek that ran between stands of cottonwood trees, the water low this late in the season, but still moving with purpose toward some destination it understood better than she understood her own future. She sat down on a large, flat rock and finally allowed herself to think about Charles, really think about him for the first time since the telegram had arrived. They had been formally engaged for 6 months, though she had known him for nearly 2 years before that. He had been attentive in the prescribed ways, bringing her flowers when he visited, complimenting her piano playing, expressing the proper sentiments about their future together. But had she ever truly loved him? Had she ever felt her heart race when he entered a room, or counted the hours until she would see him again? The honest answer was no. She had been pleased by the engagement because it was a good match, because it would secure her family's position, because it was what everyone expected of her. Charles had been handsome in a bland, forgettable way, and their conversations had never strayed beyond the superficial pleasantries that governed polite society. She had been preparing herself for a lifetime of such conversations, such careful maintenance of appearances, such studied avoidance of anything real or true or passionate. "You picked a good spot," a voice said behind her, and Olivia jerked around in surprise. She had been so lost in her thoughts that she had not heard anyone approach, but now she saw a man standing about 20 feet away, his hands raised slightly in a gesture of peace. He was tall and lean, dressed in the rough work clothes of a ranch hand, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that were an unusual shade of green. He had the weathered look of someone who spent his days outdoors, and there was a quiet confidence in the way he stood that suggested he was perfectly comfortable in his own skin. "I apologize for startling you," he continued when Olivia did not respond. "I was just passing through and saw you sitting here. Wanted to make sure you were all right. It is not always safe for a lady to be out here alone." Olivia felt a flash of irritation. She had been lectured quite enough about proper behavior and what was safe and appropriate for a lady. "I am perfectly fine, thank you," she said, her voice coming out sharper than she had intended, "and I would appreciate being left alone to enjoy the solitude." The man did not take offense. Instead, he smiled slightly, a genuine expression that reached his eyes and transformed his rather ordinary features into something more interesting. "Fair enough," he said. "Though if you're going to be out here much longer, you should know that storm clouds are building up over the mountains. We are likely to get rain before nightfall, and this creek can rise fast when the water comes down from higher elevations." Olivia glanced toward the west and saw that he was right. Dark clouds were gathering along the peaks, and the air had taken on that heavy quality that preceded rain in this part of California. She had been so absorbed in her misery that she had not noticed the changing weather, and now she realized that she had walked much farther than she had intended. The house was at least an hour away on foot, and she had not told anyone where she was going. "Thank you for the warning," she said, standing up and brushing dust from her skirt. I should be getting back. I can walk with you if you like, the man offered, just to make sure you get home safely before the rain hits. Olivia knew she should refuse. Being seen walking alone with a strange man would only add to her family's troubles, would give the gossips of independence even more to whisper about, but something in her rebelled against that thought, against the constant calculation of appearances and the careful management of reputation. What did it matter now? She was already ruined in the eyes of everyone who counted. What harm could one more transgression do? "All right," she said. "I would appreciate the company." They walked in silence for a while, following the creek back toward town. The man moved with an easy grace, his long legs covering the ground without apparent effort. Olivia found herself having to work to keep up with his pace, and after a few minutes he noticed and deliberately slowed down. "I am Nathan Kane," he said after they had walked for perhaps 10 minutes. "I work at the Miller Ranch about 5 miles east of Independence. Been there for the past year or so, working cattle and mending fences and doing whatever else needs doing." "Olivia Norton," she replied, and then waited to see if recognition would flash across his face, but Nathan just nodded as if the name meant nothing to him, and she felt an unexpected rush of relief. Perhaps he had not heard about her shame, or perhaps he simply did not care about the social dramas of a town where he was clearly not a part of the established families. "You are not from Independence originally?" she asked, more to fill the silence than out of genuine curiosity. "No, I am from Colorado," Nathan said. "Grew up on a small ranch near Denver. My parents died when I was 19, and I sold the place and started moving west. Worked ranches in Nevada and Utah before ending up here. I like California, though. The weather is better, and the land has good bones." Olivia tried to imagine what it would be like to have that kind of freedom, to simply pick up and move whenever the mood struck, to have no family obligations or social expectations tethering you to one place. It seemed almost impossibly liberating and also terribly lonely. "Do you not miss having roots?" she asked. "Having a place that is truly home?" Nathan considered this for a moment, his eyes scanning the horizon as if the answer might be written in the gathering clouds. "I think home is less about a place and more about a feeling," he said finally. "I've been in towns where I lived for years but never felt at home, and I have camped in the middle of nowhere and felt more settled than I ever did in a house with walls and a roof. It is about whether you feel like you belong, like you can be yourself without having to pretend or perform for anyone else." The words struck Olivia with unexpected force. She had lived her entire life in Independence, in the same house where she had been born, surrounded by people who had known her since childhood. But had she ever truly felt at home? Or had she always been performing, always trying to mold herself into the shape that others expected, always aware of being watched and judged, and found wanting? "That sounds like a very sensible philosophy," she said quietly. They reached the outskirts of town just as the first drops of rain began to fall. Nathan walked her to the corner of her street and then tipped his hat in a gesture that was both respectful and slightly old-fashioned. "You should hurry home before this gets worse," he said. "I hope you find whatever it is you were looking for out there by the creek." Olivia watched him walk away, his figure becoming indistinct as the rain intensified into a proper downpour. She hurried the last few blocks to her house and slipped in through the back door, hoping to avoid questions about where she had been. But her mother was waiting in the kitchen, her face tight with worry that quickly shifted to anger. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "You left without a word, and we had no idea where you had gone. Margaret thought perhaps you had done something foolish, thrown yourself in the creek, or some such dramatic nonsense." "I just needed some air," Olivia said, peeling off her wet shawl. "I walked out past the edge of town and lost track of time. I'm sorry for worrying you." Her mother's expression softened slightly, but the lines of strain around her eyes and mouth remained. "You must be more careful, Olivia. We cannot afford any more scandal, any more reason for people to talk. Just 2 more weeks, and then we can leave all of this behind. Surely you can manage to conduct yourself properly for 2 more weeks?" Olivia nodded and excused herself to her room, where she changed into dry clothes and stood at the window watching the rain sheet down from a sky gone dark and heavy. She found herself thinking about Nathan Kane, about his calm presence and his unconventional ideas about home and belonging. He had looked at her without judgment, without the pity or contempt that she had grown so accustomed to seeing in other people's eyes. It had been such a small thing, that simple courtesy, but it had made her feel almost human again. The rain continued through the night and into the next day, turning the streets of Independence into rivers of mud and keeping everyone indoors. Olivia helped her mother with the packing, wrapping dishes in newspaper and sorting through years of accumulated possessions. Margaret maintained her hostile silence, speaking only when absolutely necessary, and making sure Olivia understood through every gesture and expression that she had not been forgiven. When the weather finally cleared on Saturday, Olivia found herself drawn back to the creek despite her mother's warnings. She told herself she was just going for a walk, that she needed the exercise and the fresh air after being cooped up in the house. But in truth, she was hoping to see Nathan again, to recapture that brief sense of connection she had felt during their walk back to town. She found him at the same spot where they had first met, sitting on the flat rock she had claimed as her own that first day. He looked up as she approached and smiled, as if he had been expecting her. "I thought you might come back," he said. "This is a good place for thinking, and you looked like you had a lot on your mind the other day." Olivia sat down beside him, maintaining a proper distance but close enough that they could talk without raising their voices. "You were right about the storm," she said. "I barely made it home before the worst of it hit." "Learned to read weather when I was about 10 years old," Nathan said. "My father used to say that a good rancher pays attention to signs most people miss. The way animals behave, the smell of the air, the shape of clouds. The land is always telling you things if you know how to listen." They talked for hours that afternoon, the conversation ranging from cattle ranching to books to the differences between Colorado and California. Nathan had read more widely than Olivia would have expected for someone with his limited formal education, and he had a natural intelligence that expressed itself in unexpected insights and thoughtful questions. He asked about her life in Independence, and she found herself being more honest than she had intended, telling him about the broken engagement and the shame it had brought on her family. "So they are sending you away," Nathan said when she had finished, his voice neutral but his eyes sympathetic. "Starting over in Sacramento where no one knows about your supposed failure." "It is not supposed," Olivia said bitterly. "I did fail. I could not keep a man interested enough to actually marry me. I humiliated my family and destroyed my father's business prospects. Those are facts, not suppositions." Nathan shook his head. "From what you have told me, it sounds like this Charles fellow did you a favor. You did not love him? He clearly did not love you, and you would have spent the rest of your life play acting at being happy. That is not failure, Olivia. That is a narrow escape." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. "Society does not see it that way," she said. "A woman who cannot secure a husband is worthless. That is simply how the world works." "That is how a certain kind of world works," Nathan corrected. "But it is not the only world. Out here, beyond the parlors and tea parties and rigid rules about who can talk to whom, people care more about what you can do than who your family is or whether you manage to get married by a certain age. My ranch boss does not give a damn about my social standing. He cares whether I can rope a steer and mend a fence and put in a full day's work. That is freedom, Olivia. That is what it means to be judged on your own merits rather than your ability to conform to somebody else's expectations." Olivia wanted to believe him, but it seemed like a fantasy, a world that existed only in her imagination. "That kind of freedom is available to men," she said. "Women do not have the same options. We cannot simply decide to become ranch hands or strike out on our own. We are dependent on fathers and husbands and brothers, and if we lose their protection, we have nothing." "Some women manage it," Nathan said. "I have met female homesteaders and ranch owners, women who run businesses and support themselves without any man's help. It is harder for them, I will not pretend otherwise. But it is possible, if you are willing to work for it and ignore all the people who will tell you it cannot be done." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the creek flow past with its cargo of leaves and small twigs. Olivia felt something shifting inside her, a small rebellion against the narrative of failure and shame that had defined her life for the past 6 weeks. What if Nathan was right? What if Charles breaking their engagement was not the end of her life, but the beginning of something different? Something she could not yet imagine? "Will you come back tomorrow?" Nathan asked as the sun began to sink toward the western mountains. "I would like to see you again, if you are willing." Olivia knew she should say no. She was leaving Independence in less than 2 weeks, and there was no future in whatever this was between them. But she found herself nodding, agreeing to meet him at the same place the following afternoon. They walked back to town together again, talking about everything and nothing, and when they parted at the corner of her street, Nathan caught her hand briefly and squeezed it in a gesture that felt like a promise. Sunday passed in a blur of church services that her family still refused to attend, and more packing and her mother's increasingly frequent crying jags. Monday morning arrived with brilliant sunshine and unseasonably warm temperatures, and Olivia could barely contain her impatience as she waited for the afternoon to arrive. She told her mother she was going for a walk, ignoring the disapproving look that followed her out the door. Nathan was waiting at the creek, and this time he had brought a blanket and a basket of food. "I thought we could have a picnic," he said with a slightly self-conscious smile. "Nothing fancy, just some bread and cheese and apples, but it seemed like a good day for it." They spread the blanket on the bank and sat down to eat, talking with the ease of people who had known each other far longer than a few days. Nathan told her about his childhood in Colorado, about learning to ride before he could walk, and helping his father with the ranch chores from the time he was big enough to carry a bucket. Olivia talked about growing up in Independence, about the pressure of being the eldest daughter in a family that was always scrambling to maintain its precarious position in local society. "Did you ever want something different?" Nathan asked. "Something beyond what your family had planned for you?" Olivia thought about this seriously, trying to remember a time before her life had been entirely consumed by the project of making a good marriage. "I used to love drawing," she said finally. "When I was younger, I would spend hours sketching the mountains and the trees and the buildings in town. I was not particularly talented, but I enjoyed it. It made me feel peaceful, like everything made sense when I could translate it into lines on paper, but my mother said it was not a suitable occupation for a young lady, that I should be practicing my needlework and my piano instead, so I stopped." "That is a shame," Nathan said. "The world needs more people who can see beauty and capture it. We have plenty of needlework and piano playing already." Something about the way he said it with complete sincerity and no trace of mockery made Olivia want to cry. When was the last time anyone had taken her interests seriously, had suggested that what she wanted might actually matter? "It does not signify now," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I have not drawn anything in years. I probably would not even remember how." "Skills like that do not disappear," Nathan said. "They just wait for you to pick them up again. You could start drawing again if you wanted to. Nothing is stopping you except your own belief that you cannot." They talked until the shadows grew long and the air began to cool with the approach of evening. Nathan walked her back to town as he had before, and at the corner where they always parted, he turned to face her directly. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice serious. "I am developing feelings for you, Olivia. Real feelings, not the polite pretense that passes for courtship in your social circles. I know you are leaving soon, and I know I have nothing to offer you that your family would consider acceptable. But I wanted you to know the truth. These past few days with you have been the best I have had in a very long time." Olivia felt her heart hammering in her chest. This was reckless and impossible and completely inappropriate. She barely knew this man, and he was right that her family would never accept him. He was a ranch hand with no prospects, no social standing, no connection to the kind of life she had been raised to expect. But when she looked at him, at the openness in his face and the genuine emotion in his eyes, she felt more alive than she had in months, or possibly years. "I have feelings for you too," she admitted, the words coming out in a rush. "I should not, and it makes no logical sense, but I do. I think about you constantly. I count the hours until I can see you again. But Nathan, I do not know what to do with these feelings. I am leaving in a week. My family is depending on me to go with them to Sacramento and help them rebuild what I destroyed. How can I even consider anything else? Nathan reached out and took both of her hands in his grip warm and solid and real. Come away with me, he said. Do not go to Sacramento. Stay here or we can go somewhere else entirely. I do not have much money, but I can find work anywhere. We can build a life together, a real life based on what we want instead of what everyone else expects. I know it is fast, I know it seems crazy, but when something is right, you know it. And this is right, Olivia. You feel it too, I can see it in your eyes. Olivia felt torn between desire and duty, between the wild possibility he was offering and the obligations that had governed her entire existence. I cannot just abandon my family, she said, even as part of her wanted desperately to say yes to everything he was proposing. They need me. They have suffered enough because of my failures. You have not failed them, Nathan said fiercely. They have failed you by making you believe that your worth depends on some man's willingness to marry you. You deserve better than that, Olivia. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not for how well you can perform the role of dutiful daughter or society wife. She pulled her hands free, taking a step back. I need time to think, she said, her voice shaking. This is too much, too fast. I cannot make a decision like this in one moment. Nathan nodded, though she could see the disappointment in his eyes. Take the time you need, he said, but just remember that sometimes the safe choice is the one that will destroy you slowly, piece by piece, until there is nothing left of the person you were meant to be. Olivia walked the rest of the way home in a daze, her mind spinning with possibilities and fears. When she entered the house, her mother was in the parlor going through old letters and photographs, sorting them into piles for keeping or discarding. She looked up as Olivia came in, and for a moment her face was unguarded, showing the fear and exhaustion she usually kept hidden. We received another letter from your father, she said, gesturing to an envelope on the side table. The house in Sacramento is smaller than he hoped, and his new position pays less than what he was making here. We will have to be very careful with money, very economical. Margaret is quite distraught about it all. She had hoped to have a season in San Francisco next year, but that is clearly out of the question now. Olivia felt the weight of those words like stones piling on her chest. This was her fault, all of it. Her family's reduced circumstances, her sister's disappointed hopes, her mother's constant anxiety. How could she possibly consider abandoning them to run off with a cowboy she had known for less than a week? But that night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, she could not stop thinking about what Nathan had said about the safe choice destroying you slowly. Was that what her life in Sacramento would be? A slow erosion of everything she might have been until she was nothing but a cautionary tale. The spinster daughter who had failed to secure a husband and spent the rest of her days in the shadow of her own disappointment. She met Nathan at the creek every day that week, and each time it became harder to imagine saying goodbye to him. He made her laugh with stories about misadventures on the ranch, and he listened intently when she talked about her dreams and fears, treating her thoughts as if they mattered. He brought her wildflowers and smooth stones from the creek bed, small gifts that felt more precious than all the expensive trinkets Charles had given her during their courtship. On Friday afternoon, 4 days before her family was scheduled to leave Independence, Nathan asked her to marry him. They were sitting on their usual rock, their hands intertwined, and he said the words with quiet conviction. I love you, Olivia Norton. I want to build a life with you, whatever that life might look like. I am not asking you to give up everything for me. I'm asking you to choose yourself, to choose happiness over duty, to take a chance on something real instead of accepting a half-life of resignation and regret. Olivia felt tears streaming down her face, and she was not sure if they were born of joy or terror or some combination of both. Yes, she heard herself say, the words surprising her even as it left her lips. Yes, I will marry you. I do not know how we will manage it or what my family will say, but yes, I choose this. I choose you. Nathan pulled her into his arms, And they stayed like that for a long time, holding each other as the sun sank lower and the shadows lengthened around them. Finally, he pulled back and looked at her seriously. "We should get married as soon as possible," he said. "Tomorrow, if we can arrange it. Once you tell your family, they will try to stop you. They will tell you that you are making a terrible mistake, that I am taking advantage of you, that you will regret this for the rest of your life. I need you to be sure, Olivia. I need you to know that you can withstand that pressure." "I am sure," Olivia said, and she was surprised to realize it was true. For the first time in her life, she was making a choice based on what she wanted rather than what was expected of her, and it felt both terrifying and exhilarating. "Let us do it tomorrow. Let us get married before I can lose my nerve." They made plans quickly, speaking in low, urgent voices as the light faded. Nathan knew a judge in the next town over who could perform the ceremony without all the formalities and waiting periods that usually accompanied marriage. They would meet at the livery stable at dawn, ride to Lone Pine together, and be married by noon. Then they would head east to Nevada, where Nathan had friends who ran a ranch and were always looking for reliable help. Olivia walked home slowly that evening, trying to gather her courage for what she knew would be the most difficult conversation of her life. She found her family at dinner, the four of them gathered around the table in near silence. The food was plain, economical, another reminder of their reduced circumstances. "I need to tell you something," Olivia said, her voice sounding strange and distant to her own ears. "I have met someone, a man named Nathan Kane. He has asked me to marry him, and I have accepted. We're getting married tomorrow." The silence that followed was absolute. Her mother's fork clattered to her plate, and her father stared at her as if she had suddenly begun speaking a foreign language. Margaret's mouth fell open in shock. "You cannot be serious," her mother finally said, her voice rising to a pitch that bordered on hysterical. "Married? To whom? We know no one named Kane in Independence. Is this some kind of joke, Olivia? Because if so, it is in extremely poor taste." "He is a ranch hand at the Miller place," Olivia said, forcing herself to meet her mother's eyes. "I met him last week when I was walking by the creek. I know this seems sudden, but I love him and he loves me. We are going to build a life together." Her father found his voice, and it was cold with anger. "A ranch hand. You are throwing away what is left of this family's reputation to run off with a ranch hand. Have you lost your mind, Olivia? After everything that has happened, after all the shame you have already brought upon us, you would do this?" "I am not trying to hurt anyone," Olivia said, her hands clenched in her lap. "I am trying to choose a life that will make me happy. I do not love Charles. I never did. But I love Nathan. And he loves me for who I am, not for who he wants me to be." "Love," her mother spat the word like a curse. "What does love matter? Love does not pay bills or restore reputations. Love does not give your sister a chance at a decent marriage or help your father rebuild his business. You are being selfish, Olivia. Unforgivably selfish." Margaret was crying now, dramatic sobs that shook her whole body. "You have ruined everything," she wailed. "Or everything. First Charles and now this. How am I supposed to find a husband when my own sister has disgraced herself not once but twice? We will be pariahs, completely shut out of decent society." Olivia felt each word like a physical blow, but underneath the pain was a core of certainty that surprised her with its strength. "I am sorry that you see it that way," she said quietly, "but I'm going to marry Nathan. I am leaving tomorrow morning, and I am not going to Sacramento with you. I hope that someday you will understand that I am doing this for the right reasons, even if you cannot see that now." Her father stood up abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. "If you do this, you are no longer my daughter," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "You will not be welcome in our home, and we will not acknowledge any connection between us. You will be dead to this family, Olivia. Do you understand? Dead." The finality of those words hung in the air like smoke. Olivia felt something breaking inside her chest, but she forced herself to nod. "I understand," she said, And I am truly sorry for all the pain I have caused you, but I cannot live my life trying to atone for crimes I did not commit. I did not ask Charles to break our engagement. I did not create the social rules that judge women so harshly for circumstances beyond their control. And I will not sacrifice my one chance at real happiness to satisfy the expectations of people who are never going to accept me anyway. She stood up and walked out of the dining room, climbing the stairs to her bedroom for the last time. She could hear her mother's sobs and Margaret's accusations following her, but she did not look back. She packed a small bag with her most practical clothes and the few pieces of jewelry that were truly hers. Everything else, the trousseau and the fancy dresses and all the trappings of the life she had been expected to lead, she left behind. She did not sleep that night. She lay in bed listening to the sounds of the house around her, saying silent goodbyes to the only home she had ever known. She heard her mother pacing in the hallway outside her door, heard whispered conferences between her parents, heard Margaret crying in the next room. But no one came to try to change her mind, and as the night slowly gave way to dawn, Olivia realized that they had already begun the process of cutting her out of their lives. She dressed in the gray light before sunrise, pulling on her simplest dress and sturdy boots. She braided her hair and pinned it up, looking at herself in the mirror one last time. The face that looked back at her was pale but determined, the face of someone stepping off a cliff and hoping to find solid ground below. She slipped out of the house without saying goodbye, walking through the quiet streets toward the livery stable. Independence was just beginning to wake up, smoke rising from chimneys and early risers heading toward their work. Olivia wondered if she would ever see this town again, if she would miss it, or if she would be glad to leave all its judgment and narrow expectations behind. Nathan was waiting at the stable as promised, 2 horses saddled and ready. His face lit up when he saw her, and he crossed the distance between them in a few quick strides. "You came," he said, taking her bag and securing it to one of the horses. "I was not sure you would be able to go through with it." "I almost did not," Olivia admitted. "My family said terrible things. My father told me I was dead to them." Nathan's expression darkened with anger and sympathy. "I am sorry," he said. "I am sorry they cannot see what you are worth, but I see it, Olivia. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know how precious you are." They mounted the horses and rode out of Independence as the sun broke over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Olivia looked back once at the town receding behind them and felt a strange mixture of grief and relief. She was leaving everything she had ever known, everyone she had ever loved. But she was also leaving behind the person she had been, the dutiful daughter who had tried so hard to meet impossible standards. The ride to Lone Pine took several hours, and they stopped once to rest the horses and eat some bread and dried meat that Nathan had packed. They talked about their plans, about the ranch in Nevada where they would start their new life. Nathan painted a picture of wide skies and honest work, of a community that judged people by their character rather than their pedigree. "It will not be easy," he warned her. "Ranch life is hard, especially for someone who is not used to it. The work is physical, the hours are long, and there are no servants to handle the difficult tasks. You will be cooking and cleaning and helping with whatever needs doing. Are you sure you are ready for that?" "I am sure," Olivia said. "I would rather work hard alongside someone I love than live in comfort with people who see me as a disappointment." They reached Lone Pine in the early afternoon and found the judge's office tucked between a general store and a saloon. Judge Mitchell was an elderly man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. He looked them over carefully, clearly assessing whether this was a genuine match or some kind of hasty mistake. "You are both of legal age?" he asked. "And entering into this marriage of your own free will without coercion?" "Yes, sir," Nathan said firmly. "We love each other and want to build a life together." The judge nodded slowly. "Marriage is a serious commitment," he said. "Not something to be undertaken lightly or for frivolous reasons, but I can see you both understand that. Very well, let us proceed." The ceremony was brief and simple, nothing like the elaborate wedding Olivia had been planning with Charles. There were no flowers or music, No guests or fancy clothes, just the three of them standing in the judge's office while he read the words that would bind Olivia and Nathan together. But when Nathan slipped a simple gold band onto her finger and the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Olivia felt a rush of joy so pure and complete that it brought tears to her eyes. Nathan kissed her gently, his hands cradling her face, and she kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside. This was what love should feel like, she realized. This certainty, this connection, this sense of coming home to a person rather than a place. They spent their wedding night at a small boarding house in Lone Pine, in a clean but modest room that seemed like a palace to Olivia. Nathan was gentle and patient, taking his time to make sure she felt comfortable and cared for. And when they finally came together as husband and wife, Olivia understood for the first time what all the whispered conversations and coded references had been about. This was intimacy, true intimacy, the joining of two people who genuinely wanted each other. They set out for Nevada the next morning, following the road east through increasingly barren landscape. The Sierra Nevada gave way to high desert, all sage and sand and endless sky. They rode for 3 days, camping under the stars at night and talking for hours about everything and nothing. Nathan told her more about his childhood, about the pain of losing his parents and the loneliness of the years since. Olivia talked about her frustrated dreams and the constant pressure to be something she was not. "I feel like I can breathe again," she told him on the third night, as they lay side by side looking up at a sky dense with stars. "Like I've been holding my breath for years and only just now remembered how to exhale." "That is how I felt when I left Colorado," Nathan said. "Like the weight of expectation had been lifted off my shoulders. My parents loved me, but they had very specific ideas about who I should be and what I should want. When I finally admitted that I did not want to take over the family ranch, that I wanted to see more of the world and figure out my own path, it was like a door opening. Scary as hell, but also liberating." They reached the ranch in eastern Nevada on the fourth day, dusty and exhausted, but happy. The place was called the Double Creek Ranch, named for the 2 streams that ran through the property and provided reliable water even in the driest summers. The owners were a couple named James and Ruth Henderson, both in their 50s, who welcomed Nathan like a long-lost son. "So you finally decided to take me up on my offer," James said, clapping Nathan on the shoulder. "I told you last year that you would always have a place here if you wanted it, and you brought a wife. Well, that is excellent news. We can always use another pair of capable hands." Ruth was warm and motherly, with laugh lines around her eyes and flour on her apron from baking. She took one look at Olivia and immediately ushered her into the ranch house for tea and a proper meal. "You look worn out, dear," she said. "Rick, come sit down and tell me your story. Any friend of Nathan's is family here." Over the next few weeks, Olivia learned what it meant to be a ranch wife in Nevada. She helped Ruth with cooking and cleaning, learned to preserve food and tend a vegetable garden, practiced mending clothes and managing household accounts. It was harder physical work than anything she had done in her life, but it was also strangely satisfying. At the end of each day, she could see the results of her labor in the bread she had baked, or the vegetables she had harvested, or the mended shirt hanging on the line. Nathan worked long days with James and the other ranch hands, moving cattle and repairing fences and handling the 1,000 tasks that kept a ranch running. But every evening he came back to the small cabin that the Hendersons had given them, and they would sit together on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, content to be in each other's presence. "Are you happy?" Nathan asked her one evening about a month after their arrival. "Truly happy, or just making the best of things?" Olivia thought about this seriously. Her hands were rough and calloused now, her skin tanned from hours in the sun. She had lost touch with everyone she had known in Independence, had no idea whether her family had successfully made their new start in Sacramento. By all the measures of her old life, she should be miserable. But when she looked at the simple life she and Nathan were building together, she felt a contentment she had never known before. "I am happy," she said, taking his hand. "Happier than I ever was trying to be the person everyone expected me to be. I miss my family, and I wish things had ended differently with them, but I do not regret choosing you. Winter came to Nevada with surprising intensity. Snow piling up in the high country and temperatures dropping well below freezing at night. The work on the ranch continued, but became more focused on animal care and maintenance of equipment and buildings. Olivia learned to cook hearty meals that would sustain people working in brutal conditions, and she spent long hours helping Ruth with the endless tasks of keeping a household running. One particularly cold evening in January, about 3 months after they had arrived at the ranch, Olivia realized that she had missed her monthly courses. She said nothing at first, not wanting to raise hopes prematurely. But when another month passed and her body began to change in unmistakable ways, she knew she needed to tell Nathan. She chose a quiet moment after dinner when they were alone in their cabin. Nathan was sitting by the fire reading a book he had borrowed from James, and Olivia sat down beside him and took his hand. "I have something to tell you," she said, her heart racing with excitement and nervousness. "I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." Nathan's face went through a series of expressions. Shock and joy and fear and wonder all mixed together. Then he pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Olivia asked, suddenly uncertain. They had never discussed children, had not planned for this to happen so soon. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Nathan said, pulling back to look at her. "I am terrified and excited and grateful all at once. This is everything I never knew I wanted, Olivia. You and a family and a life we built together. I feel like the luckiest man alive." Ruth was delighted when they shared the news, immediately taking Olivia under her wing with advice about pregnancy and childbirth. The older woman had raised 3 children of her own, though all of them had grown and moved away, and she was clearly thrilled at the prospect of a baby on the ranch again. Spring came slowly to Nevada, the snow melting in fits and starts as the days gradually lengthened. Olivia's belly swelled with the growing life inside her, and Nathan became almost comically protective, insisting she avoid any task that seemed remotely dangerous or strenuous. She felt simultaneously cherished and exasperated by his hovering, but she understood that it came from a place of love. In late May, when the wildflowers were blooming across the high desert and the air smelled of sage and possibility, Olivia received an unexpected letter. Ruth brought it to her one afternoon, looking curious but not asking questions. The return address was Sacramento, and Olivia's hands shook as she opened the envelope. The letter was from Margaret, and the first paragraph made Olivia's breath catch in her throat. Her father had died 2 months earlier, a sudden heart attack that had taken him in his sleep. Their mother was distraught, barely able to function, and Margaret had been left to handle all the practical details of funeral arrangements and settling his affairs. But the second part of the letter was what brought tears to Olivia's eyes. Margaret wrote that in the weeks before his death, their father had talked often about Olivia, expressing regret for the harsh words he had spoken and the absolute terms of their parting. He had wanted to reach out to her to try to mend the breach, but pride and stubbornness had stopped him. Now it was too late, and their mother was consumed with guilt and grief over the daughter she had disowned. "I am writing to tell you that you are not dead to us," Margaret's letter concluded. "You never were, not really. We were angry and hurt and afraid, and we said things we should not have said, but you are still our sister, still our daughter, and we would very much like to know that you are well and happy. If you can find it in your heart to forgive us, please write back. Mother needs to know that you are all right." Olivia sat with the letter for a long time, crying for the father she would never see again, and the years they had lost to pride and misunderstanding. When Nathan came home that evening, she showed him the letter and let him hold her while she grieved. "What do you want to do?" he asked gently. "Do you want to write back to them?" "Yes," Olivia said without hesitation. "I do not know if we can fully repair what was broken, but I want to try. They are still my family, and life is too short to hold on to anger." She wrote a long letter that evening, telling Margaret and her mother about the life she had built with Nathan. She described the ranch and their cabin and the kindness of the Hendersons. She told them about the baby growing inside her due to arrive in September and how excited Nathan was to become a father. She expressed her sorrow over their father's death and her hope that they could find a way forward together. The response came 3 weeks later, a thick envelope containing letters from both her mother and Margaret. Her mother's letter was full of apologies and expressions of love, and she begged Olivia to visit Sacramento so they could meet Nathan and begin to rebuild their relationship. Margaret's letter was shorter but equally sincere, acknowledging the selfishness and cruelty of her earlier behavior. "We judged you harshly for choosing love over duty," Margaret wrote. "But now I think perhaps you were the brave one, and the rest of us were cowards. I hope I can be as courageous when my time comes." Olivia and Nathan discussed the possibility of visiting Sacramento, but ultimately decided to wait until after the baby was born. Travel was difficult in Olivia's condition, and they both wanted to be settled and secure before undertaking such a journey. They sent another letter explaining this, and Olivia's mother responded with understanding and an invitation to visit the ranch once the baby arrived. The summer was hot and long, and Olivia grew increasingly uncomfortable as her pregnancy advanced, but she also felt a deep sense of peace and anticipation. This child was wanted and loved already, and would be born into a home built on genuine affection rather than social obligation. The baby came on a warm September evening, just as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Ruth served as midwife, her experienced hands guiding Olivia through the long hours of labor. Nathan stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement even when she was too exhausted to respond. Their son was born just before midnight, a healthy baby boy with a remarkable set of lungs and a shock of dark hair. Nathan cried when Ruth placed the baby in his arms, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son with an expression of absolute wonder. "He is perfect," he whispered, "absolutely perfect." They named him Samuel Robert Kane, and he became the center of their world. Olivia was surprised by the intensity of her love for this tiny person, by the way her heart seemed to expand to accommodate feelings she had not known were possible. Motherhood was exhausting and overwhelming and occasionally terrifying, but it was also deeply fulfilling in ways she struggled to articulate. When Samuel was 3 months old, Olivia's mother and Margaret finally made the journey to Nevada. Olivia was nervous about seeing them again, uncertain how they would react to the life she had chosen. But when her mother stepped down from the wagon and saw her holding the baby, her face crumpled, and she started to cry. "Oh, Olivia," she said, pulling her daughter into a careful embrace that accommodated the baby between them. "I'm so sorry for everything. You were right to choose your own happiness, and I was wrong to try to force you into a mold that did not fit." The visit was not without its awkward moments. Her mother and Margaret were clearly shocked by the rustic conditions of ranch life, by the physical nature of Olivia's daily work, and the casual informality of the household. But they made an effort to be gracious, and more importantly, they were genuinely warm toward Nathan. "You make my daughter happy," Olivia's mother told him on the second day of their visit. "I can see it in her eyes, in the way she looks at you. That is all any parent truly wants for their child." Margaret bonded with baby Samuel, spending hours holding him and making silly faces to win his smiles. On the last evening of their visit, she took Olivia aside for a private conversation. "I need to apologize," Margaret said. "I was horrible to you after Charles broke your engagement. I blamed you for things that were not your fault, and I said cruel things because I was scared about my own future. But watching you here, seeing the life you have built, I realized that you found something real. That is worth more than all the society marriages in San Francisco." "Thank you," Olivia said, squeezing her sister's hand. "That means more to me than you know." When her mother and Margaret left to return to Sacramento, there were tears but also promises to stay in closer contact. Olivia felt as if a weight had been lifted, as if the final piece of her new life had clicked into place. She was no longer haunted by the ghost of her former self, no longer carrying the burden of her family's disappointment. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by hard work and simple pleasures. Olivia and Nathan had two more children, a daughter they named Grace and another son they called Thomas. The cabin that had seemed adequate for two became cramped with five, so Nathan and James spent a winter building a larger house on a piece of land that the Hendersons sold them at a fair price. Olivia's relationship with her mother and sister continued to strengthen over time. They exchanged letters regularly and visited back and forth several times a year. Her mother eventually admitted that she had been wrong about almost everything, that social standing and reputation mattered far less than genuine happiness and love. "You taught me that," she told Olivia during one visit. "You were willing to risk everything for something real, and you found it. I spent so much of my life worried about what other people thought, trying to maintain appearances that ultimately meant nothing. I am grateful that at least one of my daughters had the courage to choose differently." Nathan thrived on the ranch, becoming James's right-hand man and eventually a partner in the operation. He had a natural way with horses and cattle, and the other ranch hands respected his quiet competence. But his greatest joy was always coming home to Olivia and their children, to the warm chaos of family life, and the comfort of being with people who loved him unconditionally. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan took Olivia back to the creek outside Independence where they had first met. They had traveled to California to visit her mother and sister, and Nathan had arranged for them to have a day alone together while the children stayed with family. They sat on the same flat rock where they had shared that first picnic, and Nathan pulled out a small wrapped package. Inside was a leather-bound sketchbook and a set of drawing pencils. "You told me once that you used to love drawing," he said. "I thought maybe you would like to start again." Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. In the busyness of raising children and helping run a ranch, she had not thought about drawing in years. But now, holding the sketchbook in her hands, she felt that old spark of interest rekindling. "Thank you," she said, kissing him softly. "Thank you for remembering. Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me when no one else did." "That is easy," Nathan said, pulling her close. "You are the most extraordinary person I have ever known. I have never regretted asking you to marry me, not for a single moment. You are my best friend, my partner, my love. You made me believe in happiness again." They sat together as the sun moved across the sky, talking about everything they had built together and everything they still hoped to achieve. Olivia thought about the girl she had been 10 years earlier, broken and ashamed and desperate for escape. That girl would barely recognize the woman she had become, strong and confident and secure in the knowledge that she was loved. "I used to think that broken engagement was the worst thing that could have happened to me," Olivia said. "I thought it meant I was a failure, that I had disappointed everyone who mattered. But now I see that it was the best thing that ever happened. If Charles had not broken our engagement, I would have married him and spent the rest of my life pretending to be happy. I would never have met you. I would never have known what real love feels like." "Everything happens for a reason," Nathan said. "Even the painful things, even the moments that feel like the end of the world, sometimes they are actually the beginning of something better than you could have imagined." They returned to Nevada the following week, back to the ranch and their children and the life they had built together. Olivia started drawing again, sketching the landscape and the animals and her family during quiet moments. She found that Nathan had been right, that the skill had not disappeared, but had simply been waiting for her to reclaim it. Years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the seasons changing across the high desert. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man who loved books and horses in equal measure. Grace inherited her mother's artistic talent and spent hours drawing elaborate pictures of everything she saw. Thomas was the adventurous one, always climbing trees and exploring the furthest corners of the ranch despite his parents' warnings to be careful. James Henderson died when Olivia was 38, passing peacefully in his sleep after a long and full life. Nathan and Olivia bought out Ruth's share of the ranch, becoming full owners of the property they had helped build into a thriving operation. Ruth moved into a smaller house on the property and became an indispensable grandmother figure to the Kane children. Olivia's mother passed away 2 years later, her death peaceful and expected after a long illness. Olivia was grateful that they had reconciled when they did, that they had spent the last 15 years of her mother's life rebuilding their relationship. At the funeral, Margaret told stories about their childhood and independence, about the sister she had once resented but now admired more than anyone else she knew. "You were always the brave one," Margaret said, "even when we could not see it. You knew what you wanted, and you went after it, regardless of what anyone else thought. I wish I had learned that lesson earlier, but I'm grateful I learned it at all." Samuel left for college when he turned 18, heading to San Francisco to study law. It was difficult for Olivia to let him go, to watch her firstborn child head off into a world she no longer fully understood, but she was proud of him, proud of the thoughtful and principled young man he had become. Grace stayed closer to home, marrying a young rancher from a neighboring property and settling on land just a few miles from the Double Creek Ranch. Thomas took over more and more of the day-to-day operations as Nathan's knees grew creaky and his back less willing to handle the rigors of ranch work. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Olivia and Nathan took a trip to Colorado so he could show her the place where he had grown up. The ranch had been sold and resold multiple times, and the new owners had changed much of what Nathan remembered. But the mountains were still magnificent, and standing in the place where Nathan had first learned to ride and rope and dream about the future made Olivia feel closer to understanding the journey that had brought them together. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked him one evening as they sat on the porch of a boarding house in Denver. "Leaving this place, giving up your family's ranch, spending your life wandering from place to place until you ended up in California?" Nathan shook his head slowly. "Not for a minute," he said. "Every choice I made, every place I went, brought me closer to you, and finding you was worth everything that came before." They returned to Nevada as autumn was painting the landscape in shades of gold and red. The ranch was thriving under Thomas's management, and Grace had just given birth to their first grandchild, a baby girl with her grandmother's smile. Olivia held the infant and felt the circle of life continuing, generation following generation in patterns both familiar and new. "We have built something good here," Nathan said one evening as they sat together watching the sunset. They were in their 50s now, no longer young but not yet old, their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard work, but their spirits still strong. "We have built a family, a home, a legacy that will continue after we are gone. That is more than most people get." Olivia leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him and the comfort of 25 years of shared life. "I could not have done any of it without you," she said. "You gave me the courage to choose myself, to believe that I deserved happiness. You changed my entire life." "We changed each other's lives," Nathan corrected gently. "That is what love does. It transforms you, makes you better than you thought you could be. You taught me what home really means, Olivia. Not a place, but a person. Wherever you are, that is where I belong." More years passed, bringing both joys and sorrows. Samuel became a successful lawyer in San Francisco and married a school teacher he met through Margaret, who had become quite progressive in her middle age and was involved in various reform movements. Grace and her husband expanded their ranch and had 3 more children, filling Olivia's life with grandchildren to spoil and love. Thomas married late but well, bringing a capable and kind woman into the family who helped him run the Double Creek Ranch with skill and dedication. Nathan's health began to decline in his early 60s, the accumulated toll of decades of hard physical labor finally catching up with him. His knees gave him constant pain, and his heart was not as strong as it once had been. But he remained cheerful and engaged with life, spending his days working at a slower pace and his evenings surrounded by family. On a warm summer evening when Nathan was 65 and Olivia 63, they sat together on the porch of the house they had built so many years ago. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and purple, and grandchildren were playing in the yard while their parents called warnings and encouragement. Nathan reached over and took Olivia's hand, his grip still strong despite his physical limitations. "I have been thinking," he said, "about that day we met by the creek, about how unlikely it all was, how easily we might have missed each other entirely. If you had not gone for a walk that afternoon, if I had taken a different route back to the ranch, if you had decided to stay with your family despite everything. So many things had to align perfectly for us to find each other. I used to wonder about that too, Olivia said. But now I think maybe it was not luck or chance. Maybe some things are meant to happen, some people are meant to find each other. All the pain and shame and difficulty I went through before I met you, it was all leading me to exactly where I needed to be. Nathan smiled, the expression lighting up his weathered face. Do you remember what I told you that first day? That home is less about a place and more about a feeling? I remember, Olivia said. I think about those words often. You are my home, Olivia Kane, Nathan said. You have been from the moment I met you. And building a life with you, raising our children, growing old together on this ranch has been the greatest privilege of my existence. I want you to know that, to really understand how grateful I am for every day we have had together. Olivia felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they were happy tears, tears of gratitude and contentment and deep, abiding love. I know, she said, I have always known, and I feel exactly the same way. Nathan died peacefully 3 years later, in their bed with Olivia beside him. His last words were, I love you, spoken clearly despite his labored breathing. Olivia held his hand as he slipped away, her heart breaking even as she gave thanks for the 46 years they had shared together. The grief was profound, a physical ache that made every breath difficult. But surrounded by her children and grandchildren, supported by the community they had built over decades of good work and honest dealing, Olivia found the strength to continue. She knew that Nathan would want her to keep living fully, to find joy in the family they had created and the land they had loved. She lived another 12 years after Nathan's death, long enough to see great-grandchildren born and Samuel appointed to an important judgeship. She spent her days drawing and writing letters and telling stories about the early days of the ranch to grandchildren who listened with wide eyes. She kept Nathan alive through her memories, sharing with anyone who would listen the story of how a broken engagement and a chance meeting by a creek had led to the greatest love of her life. On the evening before she died at the age of 81, Olivia sat on her porch watching the sun set over the mountains. Grace was with her, keeping her company in the quiet way that had always characterized their relationship. The house was full of family. 3 generations of Kanes gathered to celebrate Thomas's birthday. Did you have a good life, Mother? Grace asked. Are you happy with how everything turned out? Olivia smiled, thinking about the long and winding path that had brought her from independence to this moment. I had a wonderful life, she said. It was not the life I was supposed to have, not the life anyone expected for me, but it was mine, chosen freely and lived fully. Your father taught me that the greatest act of courage is choosing your own happiness over other people's expectations. That lesson shaped everything that came after. She paused, looking at her daughter with eyes that still held their sharp intelligence despite her advanced years. Never let anyone tell you that you are not enough, Grace. Never let shame or fear keep you from reaching for what you truly want. Life is too short and too precious to waste on pretending to be someone you are not. Olivia died in her sleep that night, slipping away peacefully with her family around her. At her funeral, Samuel told the story of how his parents had met and fallen in love despite all the obstacles in their path. He talked about their courage and their commitment to each other, about the legacy of love and authenticity they had left for their children and grandchildren. My mother used to say that her broken engagement was the best thing that ever happened to her, Samuel said, because it freed her to find something real, something worth having. She taught us all that true happiness comes not from meeting other people's expectations, but from having the courage to be yourself. That is the gift she gave us, and it is a gift we should all treasure. The ranch continued under Thomas's management and eventually passed to his children, remaining in the Kane family for generations. The story of Olivia and Nathan became part of family lore, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. The simple gold wedding band that Nathan had placed on Olivia's finger in that judge's office in Lone Pine was passed down to Samuel's daughter when she got married, a tangible connection to a love story that had defied convention and expectation to create something beautiful and lasting. And in Independence, California, where the story had begun so many years earlier, the creek still flowed between its stands of cottonwood trees. The flat rock where Olivia and Nathan had sat and talked and fallen in love was worn smooth by years of water and weather, but it remained a quiet testimony to the power of choosing courage over fear, love over duty, and authenticity over the hollow approval of people who would never truly understand. Their story was proof that sometimes the most important thing you can do is trust yourself enough to walk away from what everyone expects and toward what your heart knows is right. That shame and failure, viewed through a different lens, can become liberation and opportunity. And that real love, the kind built on genuine connection and mutual respect, can transform not just two lives, but generations of lives that follow, creating ripples of courage and authenticity that spread far beyond anything the original lovers could have imagined.